Hello, this is Ken Ferrie from Crop Tech Consulting in Hayworth, Illinois. In today's video, I'd like to talk about delayed planting, which happens every now and then. Here it is this year, it's going to be delayed planting. It's May 2nd. We have hardly any beans or corn in the ground in Illinois. Right now, we're sitting in a rain delay where in the last 3-4 days, we've picked up over 6 inches of water in most parts, which means that planting is going to be pushed out to the 15th to 20th of May or later until things turn around. So we're dealing with a lot of phone calls of people that are getting some stress and starting to think about, when do we back out of our full season corns? When do we start changing maturities due to the late planting date? And that's what I'd like to cover in this video, is some thought and concepts as far as what to think about and when should this happen. First off, we have to realize that early and late corn depends on where you're farming. Here in central Illinois, we might consider 105-day corn to be early, while central Iowa would call 102-day corn early. Northern Wisconsin and farmers north of the border may call an 85-day corn early. One other thing that we have to consider is a 110-day hybrid in one company will not line up exactly with a 110-day hybrid in a different company. And this would be especially true if they're not grown in the same growth zone. I'm going to focus on central Illinois in my examples, but the same train of thought can work across all growing zones. As crop tech customers, we recommend that they mix their hybrids up to mitigate risk. So we're going to mitigate risk by being diversified with our hybrid lineup, meaning we would like you to plant some early, some mid, and some full season corn. We recommend planting your early corn early and your late corn last. So we do have a breakup in the actual growth stages as we go through this season. We don't want all our corn at the same growth stage at the same time. So again, we're trying to mitigate that risk, especially during pollination. Having a spread of GDUs to silking is more important today because of how fast you guys can get this crop planted. Catching a 103-degree week during pollination is a yield killer. Midwest and northern corn growers are more concerned about the freeze date in the fall. Can this crop get done? And can they get all their fall duties done? So how do we finish up that harvest? Can we make it? Where southern growers, they're more worried about extreme heat during grain fill and what that does to yield. And of course, harvest conditions when we start to talk about hurricanes and things like that would move in on their fall harvest. So part of it is yield and part of it is, what's the end game? What's the fall going to bring for us? Most farmers realize it, and we see it here in our plot work as other researchers, that typically it's your full season corns for your growth zone that have the highest yield potential. Now this of course is due to more time between pollination and black layer to accumulate starch. So we do want full season hybrids in that lineup because that's where our highest typical yield potential comes from on an average year. Now when we get those years that aren't average, then it's anyone's guess, whether it's the early corn will do better, the mid, the late corn. Again, that's why we recommend, to mitigate risk, you spread your maturities out. It helps you with your scouting duties and it helps you with your harvesting duties. So you don't have the crop all there at the same time, but it also gives you some risk diversity there if the condition is not average. Each farming operation is different. Some farmers like to plant earlier hybrids to take advantage of early market, or they need early feed. Other growers, are a situation where most of their grain goes to town. So there's a drying cost and handling cost that they're concerned about, and they may stay away from full season maturities just to make sure they don't have a big drying bill. Then there's others who are set up to handle the grain and handle wet grain and dry that grain, and they tend to stay more towards the full season hybrids and push for the higher yields. So there's a lot of different mixes. Now, how much you put in each mix, early, mid, or late, really depends on your operation and how well you can handle that grain and what your marketing and other strategies are. But the main recommendation is that everybody has some mix across those for protection. Now, as we have the discussion about changing our plan, we had a plan, we're going to put these hybrids in certain places. Now we're talking about changing the genetics and moving things around. Everybody in that operation needs to know what's going to take place. So your pest team, for instance, that's doing the scouting and recommendations to manage everything from insects to weeds, as well as your applicators. We don't want to pull out a Roundup Ready hybrid and turn around and put in a non-GMO in its place and then not get that communication down through the lines and end up spraying a corn and killing it. So as we make these last minute changes, we've got to make sure communication is changed all the way to the applicators, to the pest boss, all the way to the harvest guys. What's that going to change in our operation? So everybody's on the same page. So let's go back to our question of when do we start to change our corn maturities due to late planting? Now again, if we're diversified into early, mid, and late season corns, most likely we're only talking about the late season corn of your portfolio of hybrids. When do we start to make the changes and move those out? Corn truly does adjust for its growing season. What we call an early corn here in central Illinois, 102, 103 day corn, may yield 220, 250, while an early corn in southern Minnesota, say a 96 to 100 day corn, may yield 220 to 240. No matter what the zone you farm in, the highest yields again typically come from your fuller season corn. As I look at our plot data the past 2 years, I see that as well. Our 102 to 105 day corns averaged right at 250 bushel. Our 110s to our 112s at 270. 115 to 116 day hybrids average at 280. We'll be using these numbers as we walk through some examples and talk about how we deal with this delayed planting. So the spread from our full season corn to our early season corn is about 30 bushel, 250 to 280 bushel. The question is, how much do full season hybrids pull back when they're planted late? So if you look at different studies done in this area, it varies some. From what I've seen in our plots as well as others, I would say full season corn gives up about 1.6 bushel per day after the optimum planting date, while mid-season corns give up about 1.3 bushel per day and short season corns only give up a bushel. So let's say here at Hayworth on April 21st, as an optimum planting date, the clock starts and we start ticking down as we go past that date. So let's say we are 30 days late. We go from April 21st to May 21st, and we're 30 days delayed in planting. And our 115, 110, 102 day hybrids are planted out here. Originally, if I'd have got them planted in ideal conditions, they'd have been 280, 270, and 250. If I plant them 30 days late, on average, my 115-day genetics is going to give up about 1.6 bushel a day, losing 48 bushel. I'm going to lose 39 bushel in that 30-day window for my 110, 30 in my 102. So true, I lose less corn at a short season hybrid than I do in a full season hybrid due to delayed planting. But again, with the short season hybrid, I started out with less. So in the end, I'm still at a higher yield level by planting my full season corn late. I'm at 232 bushel versus 220 at my 102. So I've given up 12 bushel in yield when I've changed those hybrid genetics across there. Now, we're saying that we're giving up 30 bushel on 102-day hybrid, assuming conditions were perfect on April 21st to plant corn. And there's where sometimes we get confused. We talk about, okay, I'm losing a bushel, bushel and a half a day, I got to get planted. If we mud that corn in on April 21st, we went out and worked the field wet, we put in compaction, we mud the corn in just to make sure we get it in on April 21st, there's a good chance between the mudding the corn in and the compaction we put in that we give up 60 bushel on the first day. And we could have planted 20, 25 days late and still only given up half of what we do when we mud that corn in. So again, we got to take these numbers with a grain of salt. What we're saying is if we missed an opportunity to plant in perfect conditions, this is the kind of potential we're giving up. But we can't compare this to a shoddy stand that was mudded in. With that said, we have to keep the end game in mind. Will our full season corns make it before the freeze? And will we have enough time to do our fall duties? Now, the amazing thing about corn is it has an internal clock, and it'll make adjustments It knows when it's been planted late, and it's going to start to readjust its reproductive schedule. Most research indicates corn plants can reduce their GDUs to black layer by 6 to 7 GDUs per day that they're planted late or behind. Most hybrids can cut 5 to 7 days off of their relative maturity. So a 102-day hybrid that would black layer at 2,449 GDUs, meaning that it would black layer on 8/29, if we planted it 30 days late, it would actually adjust its GDUs so it would black layer at 2,328, in essence making it a 97-day corn. And it would black layer on 9/7. If we had a 110-day hybrid planted April 21st, and it would black layer at 2,640 GDUs, or on September 8th, you plant it 30 days late, it's going to black layer at 2,449 GDUs. It's going to make that big of an adjustment, or in essence, it's pulling itself to 103, 102-day corn, and it's going to black layer later. We take a 115-day corn that would black layer at 2,763 GDUs, plant it 30 days late, and again, it's going to black layer at about 2,578. So we're going to push it back as well. So we think about, what kind of GDUs it takes to get this hybrid done, and realizing that hybrid is going to make those adjustments across there. So if we think about our growing season and where we live, what is the amount of GDUs that you have to work with? And when I say what we have to work with, I'm using, in this case, a 30-year weather pattern. So a 30-year weather pattern here at Hayworth, if I plant a 102-day hybrid on April 21st, it's going to black layer on September 8th, and I'm going to be below 20% moisture by 10/5. If I plant it on May 21st, it's going to act like a 97-day hybrid, and it's going to black layer at 9/13 or 10/14 is going to be when it's below 20%. So we're looking at the fall moisture. It becomes what you can handle again. So here in Central Illinois, a lot of growers don't like to start early. They like to take dry corn from the field to the elevator, or they like to take corn from the field to the bin and just put air on it, or put it in a bag and pick it up and dry it later. Well, that all works if you're at 20% or less in moisture. It doesn't work real well at 28% moisture. So we have to think about that right now, is how well are we at handling that moisture in the fall? A lot of the growers in the northern part of the country, they are used to wet corn. So they have their facilities set up to handle wet corn, and harvesting 28% corn isn't out of the realm for them. So one of the things you have to think about is, how can I handle the fall of wet corn? If you take most of your corn to the elevator, can the elevator handle wet corn? Now, not just one or two customers with wet corn. What happens when the whole neighborhood brings them wet corn? Some elevators here in Illinois just amaze me how they can gobble up wet corn. Others not so much. I mean, your restriction is how we can handle that corn. What can you do with it? If you could harvest 180 acres a day, but you can only move and process 80 acres a day, and 80 acres a day is your capacity. So that becomes part of the decision of when we make changes in our genetics. Now, some guys are already pushing a large percentage of their genetics to a full season to begin with, and they're pushing it to the limit, crossing their fingers, hoping that they can beat it, not beat the freeze and not get in trouble. Well, that's okay if you're set up to handle wet corn. But if you're not set up to handle wet corn, now we could be harvesting out there in December, and we're going to deal with down corn and molds and all those other types of things. So we think about where that harvest maturity moisture is going to be based on the maturity that we're going to plant. So we're talking about the average. In this case, I'm talking about a 30-year average. But we know, of course, averages are usually a mixture of the extremes that bring that average together. For instance, if we look at 2018, where we had a record warm May and June, If I were to plant a 102-day hybrid on April 21st, I would have black layered on 8/13. I'd have been 20% or less of moisture by 8/31. If I would have planted it on May 21st, it would have sensed that. It would have adjusted its maturity down to about a 97-day maturity. I would black layer still at 8/28, and I would have been below 20% by 9/18. But if the same scenario were to play out in 2009, April 21st planting, I would have been black layering at 9/10. May 21st, I would have been black layering at 9/23. If I'm black layering at 9/23, I'm going to sit there where trying to get this to below 20% isn't going to happen by December 30th. I'm still going to be at 26% moisture. Even if I finished at 9/10 using 2009's weather, I wouldn't have been below 20% moisture until 11/13, and that's of course why the 2009 harvest was drawn out so long. If we take that same scenario, but now we play it out in 115-day corn, again in 2018, we'd have been below 20% moisture on an April 21st planting by 9/17. A May 21st planting, we wouldn't have got below 20% moisture until October 2nd, but that's still time to get that harvest done. Again, though, 2009 was a cooler year. April 21st planting of a 115-day hybrid, we would black layer at 10/6. We're right on top of the 30-year average freeze date. If I planted a 115-day hybrid on May 21st in 2009, it would have reacted like a 107-day hybrid, but it still wouldn't reach black layer till 11/10, well after the typical freeze date, meaning this corn most likely would have got caught in a frost. And if we freeze at 50% milk layer, we're looking at 10-15% loss in yield there, plus a very slow dry down. And in this case, if we did make black layer, based on 25-30 GDUs per moisture point, we would still be at 29% moisture on December 30th. So we kind of get the picture of what is your growing season, how many GDUs do you have typically to work with, and what's the ranges that we're working with. That's how we pick and decide when we're going to make those changes. So one other thing we have to think about when we're changing our genetics late in the game, as we're talking about in a situation like this, is we don't want to plant an unknown genetics. Now you may be able to replace your full season genetics with some of more of your mid or early season genetics, but I'd be careful switching to genetics you know nothing about. Now seed availability can get tricky in a year like this because if it's a large area that's affected, everybody starts moving around and changing their out of their full season. So it's kind of a push on the seed industry. That's something you should have a discussion with your supplier in the front end. Now, I would not up my population in late planting because the corn is going to probably emerge in warmer soils and better conditions anyway. And later planted corn tends to get 6 inches to a foot taller when it's planted late because of its rapid growth period is right there in the prime of the GDUs. So you're going to have taller corn, higher ear placement, which if you push populations, of course, that's going to lead to potential down corn in the fall. Now again, when you're switching genetics, though, you do select the population that best fits the new genetics that you put in there, whether it's a fixed or flex-tiered hybrid in that case. But making this decision to go from a full season corn to a mid or early season corn needs to be made probably on more decisions than just yield, because there's a pretty good chance if you pull out of your full season corn, you are giving up yield. The decision needs to be catered around how you can handle the fall, how you can handle the grain and that type of thing, more than it does worrying about making the freeze date. Now again, it depends on whether we're talking about May 21st or June 10th and where you grow and where you're at. So take a look at what is the typical GDUs from your planting date to when this hybrid is going to reach black layer. And that gives you an idea then, when is it time to pull back on those hybrids.